Something changed last night. You may not know exactly what it was. You may not have seen it happen. You may not have received a message, a phone call, or any obvious sign that something in another person's world had shifted. Yet sometimes the most important changes begin quietly, behind closed doors, in moments that nobody else sees. Last night may have been one of those moments. There are seasons in life when everything appears unchanged on the outside while something enormous is moving underneath the surface. A person can wake up the next morning looking exactly the same, walking through the same room, following the same routine, and carrying the same name, while internally they are no longer standing in the same place. That is the kind of change this message is inviting you to think about, not because anyone can see the future with certainty, not because someone can magically know what another person was thinking at a particular hour, but because human beings reach turning points. People eventually come face to face with thoughts they have avoided, feelings they have pushed aside, decisions they have delayed, and truths they were not ready to acknowledge before, and sometimes that turning point happens at night. The world becomes quiet, the distractions disappear, the conversations stop, the phone is finally put down, the room becomes still, and suddenly, a person is left alone with their own thoughts. That is when the heart can become impossible to ignore. Perhaps your soulmate, as you understand that word, has reached some kind of inner crossroads. Perhaps something happened that caused them to reconsider a decision, a relationship, a direction, a fear, or even the person they have been trying to become. Maybe they realized that continuing exactly as they were would eventually lead them somewhere they did not want to go. Maybe they recognized the cost of remaining silent. Maybe they understood that avoiding a difficult truth does not make the truth disappear. Or perhaps nothing dramatic happened at all. Perhaps the change was simply a realization, and sometimes a realization is more powerful than an event. A single thought can rearrange an entire future. A single moment of honesty can change the way someone sees yesterday, today, and tomorrow. A single question can remain in the mind long after the room becomes quiet. What am I really doing with my life? What am I afraid of? What have I been avoiding? What do I truly value? Who matters to me? What kind of person do I want to become? Those questions can become a doorway, and once someone walks through that doorway, it can be difficult to return to the person they were before. This is why you may feel as though something is different. Maybe you woke up with an unusual sense that something had shifted. Maybe you suddenly thought about someone you had not been thinking about moments earlier. Maybe you felt strangely peaceful. Maybe you felt emotional without understanding why. Maybe you simply felt that a chapter was changing. Whatever the reason, do not rush to turn that feeling into a prediction. Instead, let it become an invitation to slow down, an invitation to listen to your own heart, an invitation to recognize that change does not always arrive with an announcement. Sometimes change arrives as silence, sometimes it arrives as clarity, sometimes it arrives as the realization that you cannot continue carrying yesterday into tomorrow. And perhaps this is what happened last night in the life of the person you think of as your soulmate. perhaps they reached a point where they could no longer distract themselves from something they needed to understand. Maybe they looked back at choices they had made and realized that some of those choices were driven by fear rather than wisdom. Maybe they recognized that running from an uncomfortable truth had created more discomfort than facing it ever would have. Maybe they realized that certain people, habits, or situations no longer belonged in the next chapter of their life. Maybe they understood that growing up emotionally means taking responsibility for what you feel rather than blaming everyone around you. Maybe they realized that genuine connection requires honesty, and perhaps that realization has nothing to do with you directly. That is important. A healthy spiritual message does not require you to believe that another person is secretly thinking about you every second. That every coincidence is a supernatural sign, or that you must wait for someone because destiny guarantees an outcome. Real life is more complicated than that. People have free will. People change. People make mistakes. People learn. People choose. And sometimes people choose differently than we hoped. That does not make your journey meaningless. It makes your journey real. So if something changed last night, let the first change happen inside you too. Let go of the need to know everything immediately. You do not need every answer today. You do not need to decode every silence. You do not need to interpret every coincidence. You do not need to chase someone simply because your heart is curious. You do not need to build an entire future around a possibility. Instead, become quiet enough to notice what is actually happening in your own life. Because there is something powerful about the moment when you stop trying to control another person's journey and begin honoring your own. Perhaps that is the deeper message hidden inside this title. A change happened in their life. But what might it mean for you? It might mean that you are being reminded that people can change. It might mean that you are being encouraged to remain open without becoming dependent on an outcome. It might mean that you are entering a season where you finally understand the difference between hope and attachment. Hope says, something beautiful may happen. Attachment says, something beautiful must happen exactly the way I imagined. Hope leaves room for reality. Attachment tries to control reality. And there is freedom in learning the difference. Maybe your soulmate is changing. Maybe you are changing. Maybe both of you are simply moving through separate experiences that are teaching you lessons you could not have learned any other way. You may never know exactly what happened last night. And that is okay. There are things in life that you are not meant to know immediately. There are conversations you will understand only later. There are endings that make sense months afterward. There are beginnings that appear insignificant until you look back and realize they changed everything. There are moments when the meaning of an event is invisible at first, so do not demand the ending before the story has unfolded. Allow life to breathe. Allow people to grow. Allow yourself to grow. And most importantly, do not abandon yourself while waiting to see what another person does. That is where your real power begins. You have probably experienced moments when you wanted clarity so badly that uncertainty felt unbearable. You wanted to know what someone was thinking. You wanted to know whether they cared. You wanted to know whether they regretted something. You wanted to know whether they would return. You wanted to know whether the future would finally make sense. But sometimes the greatest spiritual lesson is learning that peace cannot depend on receiving those answers. You can have peace while someone is uncertain. You can have peace while someone is distant. You can have peace while the future remains unwritten. You can have peace even when you do not know what happened last night. And perhaps that is the change that matters most. Maybe the real shift is not simply happening somewhere outside of you. Maybe it is happening within you. Maybe you are beginning to understand that love does not require you to lose yourself. Maybe you are learning that caring about someone does not mean waiting endlessly. Maybe you are discovering that your worth is not determined by another person's attention. Maybe you are realizing that your future deserves to be built on reality, communication, respect, trust, and mutual effort. That realization can feel incredibly powerful, because there comes a moment when you stop asking, "Will they choose me?" and you begin asking, "What kind of life do I choose for myself?" That question changes everything. Perhaps last night marked a similar realization for the person you think of as your soulmate. Maybe they finally asked themselves what kind of life they want. Maybe they looked at the choices they have been making. Maybe they recognized patterns they need to break. Maybe they realized that certain fears have been controlling them. Maybe they understood that avoiding vulnerability has protected them from rejection but also kept them from experiencing genuine connection. Maybe they finally admitted to themselves that something needs to change. And if that is true, then the most meaningful response from you is not pressure. It is patience, not passive waiting, not putting your life on hold. Healthy patience means allowing another person to make their own choices while you continue making yours. It means saying, "I care, but I will not abandon myself." It means saying, "I hope for something good, but I will not confuse hope with certainty." It means saying, "If our paths are meant to meet in a meaningful way, that connection will require honesty from both of us." That is a mature kind of hope, and perhaps that is exactly what this season is teaching you. You have spent enough time wondering about signs. Now it may be time to notice patterns. You have spent enough time searching for hidden meanings. Now it may be time to pay attention to clear actions. You have spent enough time wondering what someone might feel. Now it may be time to observe what they actually do. Because actions eventually speak. Not always immediately, not always perfectly, but consistently. Actions reveal priorities. Someone who values a connection makes room for it. Someone who respects you communicates honestly. Someone who wants to repair something takes responsibility. Someone who wants to grow begins changing the behaviors that caused harm, and someone who is not ready may need distance, time, or simply a different path. You do not have to force any of these outcomes. You only have to remain grounded enough to recognize reality when it appears. Perhaps last night was a night of reflection. Maybe this person remembered a conversation, maybe they thought about an unresolved issue, maybe they recognized how much time had passed, maybe something in their environment reminded them of a chapter they thought they had already closed. Maybe they realized that their previous understanding of a situation was incomplete. Human beings are constantly interpreting their lives, and sometimes one new piece of information changes the entire picture. Imagine looking at a puzzle and thinking you understand the image. Then someone hands you one missing piece. Suddenly the picture becomes different. That is what realization can do. It does not necessarily change the past. It changes your understanding of the past. Perhaps that is what happened. Maybe your soulmate did not suddenly become a completely different person overnight. Maybe they simply saw something differently, and seeing something differently can be the beginning of becoming different. But remember this, a realization is not the same thing as transformation. Thinking about change is not the same as making a change. Feeling regret is not the same as taking responsibility. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for a healthy relationship. Understanding a mistake is not the same as repairing its consequences. This distinction matters. If someone is truly changing, eventually their behavior will begin to reflect it. You will not have to guess forever. You will not have to manufacture signs. You will not have to convince yourself that silence secretly means something. Real change becomes visible. It may happen slowly. It may be imperfect. But it becomes visible. And perhaps the message for you is to let time reveal what words cannot. Do not rush the process. Do not chase certainty. Let reality speak. Maybe you are entering a season where you will become much more discerning. You will still have a soft heart, but you will also have stronger boundaries. You will still believe in love, but you will no longer confuse love with self-abandonment. You will still believe in meaningful connections, but you will stop forcing connections that require you to ignore your own needs. You will still hope, but your hope will be grounded, and that is a beautiful kind of transformation. There is nothing wrong with believing that two people can have a profound connection. There is nothing wrong with feeling that someone has had a meaningful impact on your life. There is nothing wrong with wondering whether a relationship has a deeper purpose. But purpose does not always mean permanence. Sometimes someone enters your life to teach you something. Sometimes they encourage you to become stronger. Sometimes they reveal a part of yourself you had never noticed. Sometimes they challenge you. Sometimes they show you what you will no longer accept. Sometimes they become an important part of your story. And sometimes their role changes. That does not erase what was real. It simply means that life continues. So if something happened last night, let it unfold without trying to control it. Maybe there will be a conversation. Maybe there will be clarity. Maybe there will be distance. Maybe there will be an unexpected opportunity. Maybe nothing visible will happen for a while. All of these possibilities exist, and you can remain steady through all of them. That steadiness is important because your emotions may try to run ahead of reality. Your imagination may create conversations that have not happened. Your hope may turn possibilities into certainties. Your fear may turn silence into rejection. Your memories may turn one moment into an entire story. Be gentle with yourself when this happens. Come back to what you know, what is real, what has actually been said, what has actually happened, what can you control, what deserves your attention today. Those questions can protect your peace. Perhaps the divine message you need most is not, they are definitely coming back. Perhaps it is, you are going to be okay regardless of what happens. That message is stronger. It gives you your power back. It reminds you that your life is bigger than one relationship, your dreams are bigger than one person's decision, your future is bigger than one unanswered question. There are experiences ahead of you that you cannot see yet. There are friendships you have not formed. There are lessons you have not learned. There are places you have not visited. There are goals you have not reached. There are versions of yourself you have not yet become. Do not allow uncertainty about one person to make you forget the enormous possibility contained in your own life. Maybe that is why this message found you today, not to make you obsess over what happened last night, but to remind you that change is possible. People can wake up, people can learn, people can recognize mistakes, people can become more honest, people can choose better. And so can you. You are not trapped by yesterday. You are not required to repeat old patterns. You are not defined by your worst moment. You are not limited to the version of yourself that existed before you learned what you know now. Every morning offers another opportunity to choose differently. And perhaps your soulmate is facing that same opportunity. Maybe they are realizing something about themselves. Maybe they are being challenged to grow. Maybe they are discovering that avoidance has consequences. Maybe they are learning that genuine connection requires courage. Maybe they are understanding that people cannot be treated as though they will always wait. Maybe they are learning that honesty is kinder than confusion. Maybe they are discovering that emotional maturity requires difficult conversations. Whatever their lesson is, it belongs to them. Your lesson belongs to you. And your lesson may be trust, not blind trust in another person, trust in yourself. Trust that you can handle uncertainty. Trust that you can recognize healthy behavior. Trust that you can walk away from what repeatedly hurts you. Trust that you can welcome what is genuinely good. Trust that you do not have to chase what is meant to meet you halfway. Trust that you can survive disappointment. Trust that you can remain kind without becoming naive. Trust that you can have a hopeful heart and strong boundaries at the same time. That is wisdom, and perhaps wisdom is what this change is ultimately bringing into your life. There may be moments ahead when you are tempted to interpret everything: a delayed response, a chance encounter, a song, a dream, a familiar place, a random memory, a number you keep noticing. Be careful not to make every coincidence carry a message it may not actually contain. Sometimes a coincidence is simply a coincidence. Sometimes a thought is simply a thought. Sometimes a dream is simply your mind processing emotions. You do not need supernatural certainty to honor your feelings. You can say, "This reminds me of something important." You can say, "This made me reflect." You can say, "This emotion is telling me that something matters to me." That is enough. Your inner world deserves attention without needing to become a prophecy, and perhaps that is a healthier way to understand the idea of a soulmate. A soulmate does not have to mean one predetermined person whom you are powerless to lose. It can mean a person with whom you experience meaningful growth, connection, understanding, or transformation. It can also remind you that the deepest relationship you build must include yourself, because if you constantly abandon your own needs to maintain another connection, the relationship becomes unbalanced. You deserve mutuality. You deserve respect. You deserve honesty. You deserve communication. You deserve relationships where your feelings matter too, and perhaps last night was a turning point because someone else is beginning to understand that, or perhaps you are beginning to understand it. Either way, something valuable can come from the reflection. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you no longer need to chase answers. You still care, you still hope, but you are calm. You know that if someone wants to speak to you, they can. If someone wants to repair something, they can demonstrate it. If someone wants to build something meaningful, they can participate. You no longer have to carry the entire connection alone. That is freedom, and freedom does not mean becoming cold. It means loving without losing yourself. It means caring without controlling. It means hoping without demanding. It means allowing people to make choices while making healthy choices for yourself. Maybe the change that happened last night will eventually become visible. Maybe a conversation will happen. Maybe a new decision will be made. Maybe someone will finally express something they have struggled to explain. Maybe they will apologize. Maybe they will ask for another chance. Maybe they will simply move forward in a different direction. You cannot know yet, and you do not need to know yet. Let time do some of the work. Let behavior reveal intention. Let consistency reveal character. Let communication reveal understanding. And let your own peace remain non-negotiable. There is something else you should remember. Not every delay is a denial, but not every delay is a promise either. Sometimes life simply takes